We're talking about applied ethics or practical ethics today, Carl. It's like my least favorite kind of ethics. Practical. I like the theoretical stuff. You can do that stuff while you're sitting on your couch. Is morality subjective or objective? I don't know. Let me think about it while I eat some chips in my pajamas. Is it ever permissible to lie? Let me ponder the possibilities while I binge watch The Office. But practical ethics? You gotta get up and do stuff. Who has time for that? What's that? Thank you, Carl. I am a good ethicist. Hi, welcome to this video in our series on ethics. Today, we're going to discuss applied ethics. We'll begin by providing a nuanced definition of applied ethics, rehashing how it's different from other branches of ethics, especially normative ethics. Then, we'll categorize different fields of applied ethics, noting some specific issues that arise in those fields. Let's get started. In previous videos, I've defined applied ethics as the branch of ethics that applies ethical theories to real-world problems. I'd like to qualify that definition here, but I'd also like to note that, as is often the case in philosophy, and more specifically ethics, there doesn't appear to be a universally accepted definition of applied ethics. Let me explain what I mean. In some cases, applied ethics is defined as addressing real-world issues in fundamentally practical ways. In this definition, applied ethics doesn't have to rely on normative ethical theories, nor does it have to take a deep dive into meta-ethical questions. In fact, to some, one of the main advantages of applied ethics is that it bypasses some of these debates, and gets right to the practical issues that we face in day-to-day living. This is why applied ethics is sometimes referred to as practical ethics. Consider this quote from the Ethics Unwrapped page, from the University of Texas at Austin. With a practical approach to ethics, people don't need to agree on a moral theory. Instead, they can agree to solutions to ethical dilemmas by reviewing the facts and related harms of a specific situation. This is one of the key strengths of applied ethics. Looking at this type of definition, there's a clear difference between, on the one hand, applied ethics, and on the other hand, meta-ethics and normative ethics. The latter two are more theoretical in nature, whereas applied ethics is practical in nature. But it's possible to think of applied ethics as having a theoretical side as well. Consider this definition from the Oxford Uehiro Center for Practical Ethics at Oxford University. Practical ethics, sometimes called applied ethics, aims to examine and define principles for moral behavior and apply them to real-world scenarios. The idea of examining and defining principles for moral behavior prior to applying them to particular issues adds a theoretical dimension to applied ethics. Meanwhile, Dennis F. Thompson, founding director of the Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University, differentiates between practical ethics and applied ethics, arguing that they're two separate things. Given these different views, what kind of definition should we adopt for applied ethics? There does seem to be at least one point of general agreement among the different definitions. Applied ethics has a strong practical dimension that focuses on addressing real-world problems through active solutions. The question, and where we start to see some difference, is how much room is there for theoretical discussion about what counts as a real-world problem, or how best to apply ethical theories and principles? Consider the following situation. Two people, Esther and Amir, are talking about ethics. They start off by discussing whether morality is a matter of objective fact or just subjective opinion. At this point, they're having a meta-ethical discussion. Let's say that their meta-ethical views aren't identical, but they're pretty close. Then they start discussing moral theories, and they have themselves a little debate. Esther thinks actions are intrinsically right or wrong. She tends toward deontology. Amir thinks actions are right or wrong based on whether they benefit people more than they harm them. He tends toward utilitarianism. And, as you've hopefully guessed, this is a debate in normative ethics. But then Esther and Amir start discussing climate change, and they realize that, having considered all the relevant facts, they both accept that human-caused climate change is a very serious moral issue that needs to be addressed. In fact, they feel so strongly about it, they decide to work together on an advocacy campaign to promote clean energy policies in their state. Esther and Amir disagree about why actions that cause climate change are wrong, because they adopt different normative ethical theories. But at the practical level, their disagreement doesn't necessarily matter, because they both agree that climate change is a moral issue that needs to be addressed. So their central question shifts from, why are actions things that cause climate change morally wrong to what's the best way to address actions that cause climate change. This example highlights that practical dimension of applied ethics we talked about earlier. When we're concerned about moral theories that explain why something is right or wrong or good or bad, we're tending toward normative ethics. When we're worried about how best to address morally wrong things that are actually happening in the world, we're tending toward applied ethics. Normative ethics is fundamentally theoretical, whereas applied ethics is practical. And people can disagree at the level of theory, but still work together toward a common goal in practice. But now imagine that, after having some success with their climate change advocacy campaign, Esther and Amir want to launch a different campaign. They really like focusing on the practical. Amir suggests something that promotes animal welfare, such as policies that limit hunting for sport, or laws to stop practices like factory farming. But they run into a problem here. Esther doesn't think that non-human animals deserve moral consideration like humans do, because, she argues, they don't have sophisticated language, rationality, or higher-order consciousness, so they aren't persons. So, she thinks that we can raise, slaughter, wear, and eat animals without any moral issues at all, so long as we're not harming other humans. For example, by overusing resources and harming the environment. Amir, on the other hand, is a practicing vegan. He believes that animals are sufficiently conscious to be able to suffer in morally relevant ways. He thinks that, because many animals seem to be able to suffer in ways that are similar to human suffering, we shouldn't cause those animals suffering unless we absolutely need to. Esther and Amir are about to fall into another debate. But here's the question. What kind of debate is it? There may be some meta-ethical dimensions to this debate. Esther and Amir will probably have to define morally weighted terms like person, consciousness, and suffering, and they'll have to explain how they're going to go about defining those terms. For example, how do we balance the role of philosophy and the role of science in answering the question, are cows conscious? There also seems to be an aspect of normative ethics in this debate. Both Esther and Amir are making prescriptive statements about what moral beliefs people should adopt, and how those beliefs should affect how people behave. But it also seems reasonable to argue that there's an aspect of applied ethics going on here as well. After all, this debate deals with specific real-world moral questions. For instance, is it acceptable to hunt for sport? And what are the appropriate conditions, if any, in which we can raise animals for meat? And to the extent that we think some of these things might be morally wrong, these issues require practical solutions, such as changing individual practices or communal policies. But that's kind of the problem. Not everyone seems to agree that animal welfare is actually a real-world issue. So, this debate isn't about how to solve a real-world issue, it's in part a debate about to what extent there's an issue at all. And this can be said about other issues in applied ethics. Some people think abortion is a serious moral issue because it involves the murder of another human person. But others think it's not a moral issue because the fetus isn't a person. Some people think corporations have a responsibility to make the world a better place. Others reject this idea and think corporations only have a responsibility to their shareholders. My point is this: if applied ethics is only about finding solutions to real-world problems, it can't really make sense of these types of debates, even though these debates are about specific real-world issues people disagree about. So, perhaps it makes more sense to think of applied ethics as having both a theoretical dimension and a practical dimension to it. At the theoretical level, applied ethics will draw on insights from metaethics and normative ethics, as well as disciplines like the sciences, to establish a method for making claims, and critically evaluating those claims regarding what specific kinds of real-world issues we're facing today. At the practical level, applied ethics will draw on those theoretical observations to seek optimal solutions to those real-world issues. It will also constantly evaluate those solutions to assess which ones work the best. And I might add that, for applied ethics, the theoretical aspect is always pointed toward the practical aspect. In other words, in applied ethics, theory is never done for its own sake. It's always directed toward practice. Theoretical discussions and debates are always ultimately about trying to address real-world problems in a practical way. So even with this nuanced definition that I'm suggesting, the practical level takes priority over the theoretical level. This definition helps us to think broadly about applied ethics. It also helps us to acknowledge that the boundaries between the different branches of ethics can be a bit blurry. Sometimes metaethics bleeds into applied ethics. For instance, when we have to define words like person to figure out how best to address a real-world issue. Let's shift our focus now to talk about the different fields within applied ethics. When we look at the different types of moral issues we face in the world today, we can begin to categorize them. To be clear, I'm not talking about general moral issues like murder or stealing. Discussions about such general moral issues tend to happen at the theoretical level. For example, what is murder and what makes murder wrong? And if you think about it, you don't really ever hear about campaigns to stop murder or to stop stealing. And that's in part because the concept is too vague. People don't agree on what constitutes murder and what constitutes theft. I'm talking about specific moral issues like abortion, deceptive business practices, climate change, the use of human subjects in experimentation, the use of torture during times of war, the use of the death penalty by an established state, gun violence, state censorship, and so on. When we look at the small sampling of issues, some basic categories begin to emerge. For instance, we can talk about issues that tend to arise in the fields of medicine, clinical research, public health, and related fields. We can categorize these issues into the larger field of bioethics. We can talk about issues that arise when corporations merge, when contracts are negotiated with employees, and when companies make decisions to harm local communities for their bottom line. We can categorize these issues into the larger field of business ethics. We can talk about issues that arise when humans pollute the environment, overfish the seas, cause massive habitat loss through deforestation practices, and so on. We can categorize these issues into the larger field of environmental ethics. We can talk about issues that tend to rise when humans raise animals for food, use animals for research and the development of commodities, and breed and keep animals as pets. We can categorize these issues into the broader field of animal ethics. We can talk about issues that tend to rise when politicians make decisions for the greater good, when states decide how to allocate scarce resources, and when political entities implement laws that regulate certain groups. We can categorize these issues into the larger field of political ethics. There are, of course, other areas of applied ethics, but these categories at least give you some example of how these issues are often grouped together. In this video, we've provided a nuanced definition of applied ethics, balancing its theoretical aspects with its more prominent practical aspects. We've also touched upon some common fields in applied ethics, and noted some specific issues that arise in these fields. I hope you've enjoyed this video on applied ethics, which I wrote on my couch, in my pajamas. Until next time.